Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a tale that might smell a little fishy, quite literally, actually. Imagine you're strolling through the bustling streets of ancient Rome. The air is thick with the scent of markets, spices, and, well, fish. Now, we're not talking about fresh fish that you might find in a fancy restaurant, but fish that's been left to rot, ferment, and turn into one of the most prized and pungent ingredients in the Roman culinary world: fish sauce. It's a condiment so revered, it almost had its own economy. You probably won't survive a single day in ancient Rome without catching a whiff of it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you are in the world and what time it is, so I know who's joining me on this curious journey tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you might be wondering is, how in the world did ancient Romans end up obsessed with fish sauce? Fish sauce wasn't something they invented. It's been around for millennia. In fact, the origins of fermented fish sauces can be traced all the way back to the ancient Greeks and even earlier cultures across the Mediterranean and Southeast Asia. But the Romans, they perfected it. They made it an empire-wide phenomenon, and its impact was far-reaching, beyond just the kitchens of wealthy senators or the soldiers in distant provinces. We're talking about garum, a sauce made from the fermented innards of fish. Yeah, it's basically fish guts in a bottle. But garum was like liquid gold to the Romans. It wasn't just any sauce. It was a luxury item, a marker of status, a key ingredient that brought life to everything from meats to vegetables. And the smell, well, it was less fresh seafood platter and more your favorite aunt's old attic, with a dash of fishiness. But for the Romans, this smell was something to be celebrated. Historians still argue about the exact origins of garum. Some claim it was a simple byproduct of early fishing villages, where leftover fish parts were left to ferment. Others argue it was a secret recipe passed down from Greek kitchens. Regardless, by the time the Romans got a hold of it, they had perfected the fermentation process, making garum a huge part of their daily lives, and even their trade routes. Garum wasn't just a foodstuff, it was a Roman status symbol. Think about it like this. In the ancient world, some foods were reserved for the elite: the best wine, the finest bread, and, of course, garum. But unlike those other high-end luxuries, fish sauce didn't have the same glossy, fine-tuned reputation. It was a bit, well, pungent. To us, fish sauce might seem like a quirky addition to an Asian dish. But for the Romans, it was the flavor enhancer. The more authentic the garum, the better your status. And they made sure it was something only the wealthy had access to. If you're picturing your typical Roman banquet, you can probably imagine large feasts, where tables groan under the weight of roast meats, fresh fruits, and crusty bread. And in the middle of all that, a little dish of garum, perhaps splashed on a roasted fish or mixed into a rich stew. But here's the kicker. Garum wasn't just for flavor. It was also a status symbol. The highest quality garum, made from the finest fish and aged to perfection, was a luxury item that only the richest Romans could afford. It was the equivalent of having truffle oil drizzled on your salad today. It wasn't about how much you needed it. It was about how much you could show off. The more garum you had, the more it said about your wealth and sophistication. And there were variations. just like with any luxury product. The top-tier garum was called Garum sociorum, a blend made from the freshest fish parts, often mixed with spices and kept in the most carefully maintained conditions. This wasn't the sort of thing you'd toss into a basic soup. It was a special treat, an ingredient that elevated the dish to something worthy of Rome's upper crust. It wasn't just about taste. It was about exclusivity. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of having caviar shipped to your table, though without the delicate aesthetic or the prestige it's attached to today. But despite the allure of high-quality garum, there was a more utilitarian version of the sauce that was equally widespread. This was the garum that would be used by the common folk, soldiers, and anyone else who needed an affordable seasoning to liven up their meals. Romans were pragmatic. After all, they didn't mind the less refined version. It still got the job done, adding salt and depth to otherwise bland meals. And the best part, you could buy it everywhere. In fact, garum became such a ubiquitous part of Roman life that its production became one of the cornerstones of Roman industry. There were even garum factories, yes, factories, that churned out the stuff by the barrel. Historians still debate how much garum was actually consumed by the Romans. Some suggest that it was practically in every meal, while others think it might have been a rare treat for the truly elite. Regardless, there's no denying that garum found its way into nearly every aspect of Roman society, from the kitchens of the rich to the ration packs of the Roman army. So, what exactly was in this mysterious sauce that made it so prized and, perhaps more importantly, so worth the effort of making it? The process of creating garum was far from simple. At its core, it relied on fermentation, an ancient art that required patience, care, and a rather strong stomach. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, understood the importance of patience in the kitchen. But let's just say they didn't always rely on the most refined techniques. To make garum, you would take the guts and entrails of small fish, anchovies, mackerel, and the like, and leave them to rot in the sun, mixed with salt and herbs. Yes, the smell was intense. Imagine a hot, fishy, salty breeze wafting over a stinky pile of fish parts, baking in the sun all day. It was probably a bit like a Roman version of an open-air compost heap, except instead of getting rid of waste, you were turning it into something entirely new and pretty delicious if you were a Roman citizen. The fermentation process, though not glamorous, was vital. It took weeks, sometimes months, for the fish to break down into a pungent liquid that could then be bottled. This liquid wasn't just fish juice. It was packed with flavors and rich umami that the Romans couldn't get enough of. Over time, they discovered that the longer they let it ferment, the more complex and flavorful it became. Garum became something like the fermented soy sauce or fish sauce we use today, but with its own unique profile that could be tailored to different tastes. It wasn't just for flavoring food, it was practically a culinary obsession. For the more high-end versions of garum, there was an added element of refinement. Some garum makers would take extra steps to remove any lingering impurities or odors, creating a cleaner, less intense version that would appeal to the elite. This was the premium stuff. But no matter how fancy the recipe, there was still the underlying reality. It was fermented fish parts, left to rot under the sun. Not exactly the gourmet meal most modern palates would imagine. Historians still argue whether the smell was as foul as we imagine. Some suggest it wasn't as overpowering as we think, and it was just a matter of taste and custom. After all, the Romans lived in an environment that wasn't nearly as sanitized as our own. Ancient Roman cities were filled with smells of all kinds, from animal dung to human sweat. And fish sauce might have simply been another layer in that sensory experience. If you were surrounded by smells of decay all the time, maybe the funk of garum didn't seem so bad after all. And let's not forget, the smell was only part of the process. The actual act of creating garum required a certain expertise. Too much salt could overpower the delicate flavors of the fish. Too little could result in a batch that didn't ferment properly, leaving you with a spoiled mess instead of a savory treasure. This meant that garum production was something of an art form, passed down from master to apprentice, and most importantly, produced in massive quantities by factories along the coast of the empire. These factories, called garum factories or pistrinai, were busy operations. They were usually located in coastal cities where the fish were plentiful. Like the bustling port city of Pompeii, large vats were used for the fermentation process, and workers would labor tirelessly to churn out barrel after barrel of fish sauce. For the Romans, this wasn't just food. It was an industry that fueled their empire, connecting the coastal regions to the inland cities and providing an essential component of their culinary culture. Historians still argue whether garum was truly a luxury for the elite or something more universally consumed. We know that garum wasn't just a specialty item. It became a part of everyday Roman life, spreading far beyond the palaces of the rich to the kitchens of soldiers, traders, and farmers. But it's clear that the best quality garum was still reserved for those who could afford it. Now that we've established how garum was made, let's talk about the two main types of fish sauce that dominated Roman life: garum and liquamen. You'd think these were just two names for the same thing. But no, Romans were as serious about their fish sauce as they were about their wine. And there was a definite hierarchy when it came to quality. Let's start with garum. This was the high-end, top-shelf fish sauce that the wealthy Romans adored. It was made from the best fish, typically the guts of mackerel, anchovies, and other oily fish, carefully fermented for months. The final product was a thick, flavorful liquid with a deep, umami-packed taste that could elevate any dish. The upper class would go for the finest garum available, known as garum sociorum. This variety was not only more refined, but it was also very much a symbol of wealth. If you had access to garum sociorum, you were part of an exclusive club of Roman society. But then, there was liquamen. While it was also a fermented fish sauce, liquamen was typically made from cheaper fish parts, such as those from smaller fish like sardines or even lower quality anchovies. The fermentation process was the same as with garum, but the resulting liquid was thinner, saltier, and less complex in flavor. Still, it packed a punch and was considered an essential pantry item for the average Roman. Liquamen could be found in every Roman kitchen, from the kitchens of peasants to the soldiers stationed at the empire's edges. It wasn't the fancy sauce you'd bring out for a lavish banquet, but it was still a major part of Roman cuisine. But, as with any good luxury item, it wasn't just about the ingredients or the taste. It was about how exclusive and refined it was. Roman society was structured around class distinctions, and garum was no different. The highest quality fish sauce was a mark of wealth and prestige. It wasn't just something you poured on food. It was a conversation piece, a way to show off your sophistication and taste. On the other hand, liquamen was a more accessible form of garum, something that could be used by just about anyone in Rome. It was practical, a seasoning that could be found in almost any meal. But what about those who couldn't afford garum or even liquamen? In true Roman fashion, there were always alternatives. Some Romans, especially in the provinces, would turn to cheaper, local substitutes made from a variety of fish, and occasionally even other animals like squid. They might have fermented these fish in much the same way as the Roman elite, but the results were far less refined and a lot more pungent. Historians still argue about the regional differences in fish sauce production. While coastal regions like Pompeii were known for producing garum, other parts of the empire were more likely to rely on their own variations of fermented fish sauces. There's evidence that different parts of the empire developed their own recipes and techniques, creating unique versions of fish sauce that varied in flavor, intensity, and even smell. What was served at a banquet in Rome might be very different from what you'd get in Carthage, despite both being part of the same empire. So, while both garum and liquamen were beloved by the Romans, they each had their place in Roman society, serving distinct culinary roles and catering to different social classes. The rich got the premium version, while the common folk made do with the everyday sauce. But no matter which type of fish sauce you had on hand, it was a key part of Roman life. Now, let's dive deeper into something that might surprise you: the Romans' fascination with salt. Sure, we all know salt is a key part of cooking. It's essential for flavoring, preserving, and even for that satisfying sprinkle over your fries. But for the Romans, salt wasn't just a seasoning. It was a cornerstone of their entire economy and culture. And fish sauce, whether you were splurging on garum or reaching for the more affordable liquamen, was absolutely loaded with it. Salt in the Roman world was sacred. In fact, the word salary comes from the Latin word salarium, which referred to the money given to soldiers for purchasing salt. Roman soldiers were paid in part with salt. Basically, it was currency. Salt was that valuable. You might think of it as a kind of ancient trade commodity, more precious than gold, at least in the context of daily life. It helped preserve food, kept the army running, and was crucial for their economic system. The Roman Empire was known for its vast trade routes, many of which were built around the transportation of salt, along with other valuable goods. So, when the Romans developed fish sauce, salt wasn't just a flavoring, it was a key ingredient. The abundance of salt in garum made it an especially handy preservation tool. It wasn't just about the flavor, it was about longevity. Garum could be stored for long periods, making it an ideal staple in a world where refrigeration was, obviously, not a thing. In fact, Romans didn't just rely on fish sauce for flavoring. It was a way of making sure food lasted longer in their homes or on long military campaigns. When they couldn't get fresh food, they had their trusty, preserved fish sauce to turn to. Salt also played a significant role in Roman religion. The Roman goddess Salus, who personified health and well-being, was often depicted with a pinch of salt in her hand. Salt was sacred, a symbol of life and prosperity. It wasn't just for the rich or the military. Salt was integral to every Roman's daily life, from the highest echelons of society to the lowest. But for the elite, salt and its culinary applications went beyond survival. When mixed with fermented fish, it created garum, a savory marvel that could turn a simple meal into a rich, flavorful feast. Historians still debate whether the Roman obsession with salt was entirely practical or if it had deeper cultural and spiritual significance. After all, food preservation was vital for an empire that spanned so many different climates and regions. But there's also something mystical about salt in Roman society. It wasn't just the key to longevity. It was thought to hold the power to ward off evil spirits and promote good health. When you consider how crucial salt was in the making of garum, you start to see how fish sauce wasn't just a food item. It was the perfect blend of practicality, luxury, and cultural importance. It brought salt, so important to the Romans, into a form that could be both a seasoning and a preservative. The more you dig into it, the clearer it becomes. Garum wasn't just another condiment. It was a manifestation of Roman ingenuity, blending essential ingredients with the taste of empire. So, whether you're sprinkling a bit of salt on your popcorn or reaching for the fish sauce to elevate your stir-fry, remember that the Romans were probably onto something. They were crafting a kind of culinary alchemy, using salt and fermented fish to create an ancient delicacy that would influence Mediterranean diets for centuries to come. Now that we've seen how critical salt was in the Roman world, let's talk about something just as integral to the Romans' obsession with fish sauce: their vast trade networks. Fish sauce wasn't just something you made at home and kept in a cupboard. It was big business. Roman fish sauce was a valuable commodity that helped drive the empire's economy. The production of garum and liquamen wasn't just a local affair. It was a thriving industry that spanned the empire, creating jobs, generating wealth, and bringing fish sauce to every corner of Roman civilization. It's easy to picture Rome as a city of marble and grandeur. But the empire's true power came from its ability to connect vast regions. From the misty hills of Britain to the sun-baked shores of North Africa. And one of the driving forces of this connectivity was trade. You might think of the Romans as being obsessed with military conquest. But their economic infrastructure, especially when it came to food, was just as important. Garum was one of the key products that flowed along Roman trade routes, feeding both the urban elite and the common people in far-flung provinces. The production centers for garum were located in coastal regions, particularly around the Mediterranean, where fishing was a major industry. Cities like Pompeii and Ostia were hubs of garum production. The ancient ruins of these cities show that the Romans built large factories for garum, with vats big enough to hold tons of fish guts. The factory workers, often slaves or low-wage laborers, would carefully prepare the fish and oversee the fermentation process, ensuring that the final product met the rigorous standards of the Roman market. Once it was made, garum didn't just stay in the local area. It was shipped across the empire. Archaeological evidence suggests that garum was traded in amphorae, the large clay containers used for storing and transporting liquids. These amphorae would be sealed tightly to prevent leakage and ensure the sauce was fresh when it arrived at its destination. Roman ships, which were an essential part of the empire's transportation system, carried these amphorae filled with garum to the farthest reaches of the empire. By the time you reached a Roman marketplace, you could find garum for sale almost anywhere, from Spain to Egypt, from Gaul to Africa. Fish sauce was a universal seasoning that helped tie the empire together. Historians still argue whether garum was more of a luxury good or a staple. Some believe that while the best quality garum was reserved for the rich, the cheaper versions, like liquamen, were much more accessible to the common people. This has led to a lot of debate about how widespread garum really was in Roman life. Was it something that everyone used, or was it more of a culinary indulgence for the elite? The answer likely lies somewhere in between. Garum was a product that transcended social boundaries in a way few others did, at least when it came to its use in everyday cooking. Garum wasn't just a condiment. It was a trade commodity that flowed along the Roman Empire's highways of commerce. The production of garum and its trade helped keep the empire's economy thriving, and it also helped sustain the Roman military. Roman soldiers were known to carry fish sauce with them as part of their rations, adding flavor to their often bland and monotonous meals. It was practical, portable, and nutritious. Essentially the Roman equivalent of modern-day fast food. But unlike a packet of ketchup, fish sauce wasn't just a side dish. It was the flavor foundation of Roman cuisine. We've explored the importance of garum in Roman society. But now let's dive into something a bit more unusual. Umami. The Romans were no strangers to flavor, and fish sauce was their gateway to a taste sensation that wasn't fully recognized as a distinct taste until centuries later. That's right. Garum was essentially the first taste of umami for many Romans. And while they didn't have a term for it, they certainly knew how to use it. Umami, often called the fifth taste after sweet, sour, salty, and bitter, is a savory, almost broth-like flavor that enhances the overall taste of food. Today, we know it thanks to ingredients like soy sauce, miso, and, of course, modern fish sauce. But the Romans, without the scientific knowledge we have now, intuitively understood its magic. Garum was packed with this rich, savory umami, which is why it could elevate simple dishes from basic to brilliant. When you added garum to a meal, it brought depth, complexity, and a mouth-watering savoriness that was unlike anything else in their kitchens. Historians still argue about when the term umami was first used, and whether the concept existed in ancient times. While the word itself is modern, coined by Japanese chemist Kikune Ikeda in 1908, the Romans, with their intricate culinary practices, were undoubtedly tapping into the same flavor profile. Garum's richness likely helped to bridge the gap between the acidic tang of wine and the sweetness of honey, two other fundamental ingredients in Roman cuisine. Garum acted like a flavor anchor, grounding all of the bright and sharp tastes in Roman food with a deep, almost meaty undertone. Interestingly, the Roman use of garum was so widespread that it became a central flavor in almost every meal. Whether in the kitchen of a wealthy patrician or in a humble soldier's rations, garum added that essential umami element. But the question remains, did the Romans recognize the significance of this taste the way we do today? Did they know that what they were experiencing was a rich umami flavor? Or was it just something they instinctively loved because it made food more delicious? Historians continue to debate whether the Romans were conscious of what we would now call umami, or whether it was simply part of their culinary tradition. Garum also played an interesting role in the Roman approach to food balance. Romans were obsessed with the idea of balance in their meals, particularly in terms of taste. A well-rounded meal, according to their standards, needed to have harmony among the four traditional tastes. Garum helped achieve this by providing a strong, savory base note, which, when combined with the more acidic flavors of vinegar or wine and the sweetness of honey or fruit, created the ideal Roman dish. It wasn't just about throwing together ingredients, it was about achieving that perfect harmony, which is why garum was such a coveted ingredient. What's more fascinating is that the Romans didn't just put garum in food. They also used it in drinks, especially when mixed with wine. This combination of garum and wine became a popular health tonic of sorts. The idea was that the fish sauce, rich in nutrients from the fermentation process, could enhance the wine, making it more digestive and beneficial for health. Roman soldiers would even drink it to combat fatigue. It's a strange combination, isn't it? But given how much garum permeated Roman life, it's clear that the Romans saw it as more than just a flavoring. It was a complete, life-enhancing substance. While we might see garum as just an ancient form of fish sauce, the Romans were clearly tapping into something deeper. Their love of garum wasn't just about taste. It was about harnessing the full potential of ingredients to create an experience that transcended basic sustenance. In fact, garum might have been one of the first true superfoods in history, packed with umami and rich in nutrients, all thanks to the fermentation process. Historians still argue whether the Romans fully understood the benefits of fermented foods the way we do today. But one thing's for sure, they knew garum was essential. And even though we might chuckle at the idea of fermented fish guts being a sought-after luxury item, the Romans would probably laugh at us for not realizing what a culinary gem they had stumbled upon. Fish sauce in ancient Rome wasn't just a culinary staple. It was also deeply woven into the fabric of Roman culture. To understand why garum was so ubiquitous, we need to look at how it was embedded in daily Roman life. For the Romans, food was never just about sustenance. It was about experience, pleasure, and even social status. Meals were an important part of their social structure, and garum was a key player in that. One of the most fascinating things about Roman food culture was how it reflected their social hierarchy. The wealthy Romans, for example, might have used garum as part of a lavish, multi-course feast, while the common people had a more straightforward relationship with the sauce. Garum was everywhere, but the quality varied greatly depending on your social class. The most refined, expensive garum was often reserved for the upper class, who could afford to purchase the finest versions of the sauce, like garum sociorum. This high-end garum was produced using the best fish and the most careful fermentation processes. It was rich, flavorful, and prized as a luxury item. In contrast, the working-class Romans and soldiers probably had access to a much simpler version of fish sauce, liquamen. While it was still packed with the essential salt and umami of garum, it wasn't as refined and didn't carry the same prestige. This didn't mean it was any less important in their daily meals, though. For the common people, fish sauce was a necessary seasoning that added flavor and preserved food. It was practical, it was affordable, and it helped stretch a basic meal into something more satisfying. But there was more to it than just flavoring food. Fish sauce was also a symbol of Roman culture's obsession with luxuria, or luxury. Roman elite dinners were elaborate affairs, featuring all kinds of exotic foods and elaborate presentations. Garum was an essential ingredient at these feasts. Wealthy Romans would often flaunt their access to the best garum at these events, showing off their ability to afford the finest delicacies, which were often sourced from distant parts of the empire. It wasn't just about the food. It was about showing off wealth and sophistication. This culture of luxury and excess was one of the things that made garum so special. But the appeal of garum wasn't limited to the rich. The common people, soldiers, and travelers who found themselves in different parts of the Roman Empire were all exposed to garum, and they too became addicted to its flavor. In fact, garum was likely one of the first truly widespread commodities across the empire. Whether you were in Rome, Carthage, or even Britain, garum had the potential to show up in your meal. Historians still argue about the extent to which garum was consumed by different social classes. Was it only for the wealthy elite, or did it penetrate all levels of Roman society? The answer is probably somewhere in between. While the best quality garum may have been reserved for the rich, more affordable versions were accessible to almost anyone, and given the sheer volume of garum produced, It's safe to say that it was an essential part of Roman food culture. Whether you were living in luxury or scraping by, garum had a place on your table. Fish sauce also played a significant role in Roman social life. It wasn't just about what you ate, it was about who you ate with. Romans enjoyed meals as a way of bonding. Whether it was a grand feast with friends and family or a simple supper after a long day. Sharing food was an essential part of Roman social interaction, and garum became a common thread in these connections. Just as we might offer a bottle of wine to friends today, the Romans might have brought out a jar of garum to accompany their meals, a gesture of friendship and hospitality. There's something almost poetic about how this humble fish sauce became so ingrained in Roman culture. Garum was used in every corner of Roman society, from lavish banquets to the rations of soldiers on the front lines. It was a reminder that, no matter your social class, food, and the flavors you added to it, could bridge divides and bring people together. Garum wasn't just a condiment. It was an experience, a social tool, and a marker of identity. It might have started as a simple byproduct of Roman ingenuity, but over time, it became a symbol of everything the Romans held dear: luxury, practicality, and a shared connection through food. The question then is, when was it that we, as modern-day eaters, lost the magic of garum? Why did this ancient Roman obsession fade into history? Historians still debate how garum's cultural significance might have diminished over time, especially as the Roman Empire began to crumble. Did garum's status fade along with the fall of Rome? Or was it simply overshadowed by new culinary trends? The fall of the Roman Empire wasn't just the collapse of political power. It marked the end of an entire way of life. And with that decline came the disappearance of certain foods, habits, and customs that had once been the backbone of Roman society. As the empire fractured and the Roman world splintered into smaller, often war-torn regions, the once ubiquitous presence of garum slowly began to fade. The production centers were abandoned, the supply chains collapsed, and what had once been a symbol of Roman luxury and ingenuity became a shadow of its former self. But, interestingly, garum didn't disappear entirely. While it no longer held the same widespread influence, it didn't vanish into the annals of history either. Instead, it evolved, taking on new forms as the culinary traditions of the Mediterranean continued to evolve. The centuries following the fall of Rome saw the rise of new empires, such as the Byzantine Empire, and new culinary influences began to replace the once dominant flavors of the Roman world. Yet, despite these changes, the influence of garum remained, albeit in a much more limited capacity. In the wake of the fall of Rome, fish sauce didn't disappear from the Mediterranean region, but it did evolve into different forms. The Byzantines, for instance, had their own versions of fermented fish sauces, though they were no longer as dominant or as widely used as they had been in Roman times. Garum's legacy didn't end with the collapse of Rome. It simply shifted into more regional and localized versions. It became a foundation for what we would eventually come to know as modern-day fish sauce in various Mediterranean and Asian cultures. Historians still argue about the exact moment garum's dominance ended. Some suggest that its gradual decline was tied to the shifting tides of the medieval period, while others point to the collapse of trade routes as the main cause. Regardless, it's clear that the high-end garum of ancient Rome had little place in the New World Order that followed. By the time the Middle Ages took hold, fish sauces were being used more sparingly, and new methods of food preservation and seasoning took center stage. The sophisticated Roman culinary culture that had once celebrated garum as a luxury good had given way to simpler, more regional tastes. Yet, despite these shifts, the influence of garum didn't vanish completely. Its legacy remained embedded in the Mediterranean diet, where similar fermented fish sauces were still used, albeit in more modest forms. Fish sauce continued to be a crucial component of cooking in many parts of Europe, though it was less of a status symbol and more of an everyday essential for flavoring food. The real surprise, though, is how garum was revived and reintroduced to the world. Centuries after Rome fell, fish sauce came back in a big way, not in Europe, but in Southeast Asia, in regions like Vietnam, Thailand, and Cambodia. Fish sauce took on new forms, evolving into the modern versions we recognize today, like nuoc mam or nam pla. These new versions of fish sauce may not have the same Roman roots as garum, but they were inspired by the very same principles of fermentation and flavor that had made garum so successful. Historians still argue over whether the Mediterranean fish sauces that re-emerged in the Middle Ages had any direct connection to Roman garum. Some believe that as trade between East and West increased, the knowledge of fish sauce spread and morphed across cultures. Others suggest that the ancient techniques of fermentation, rooted in Roman kitchens, were simply rediscovered through regional culinary traditions. So, despite the fall of Rome, garum didn't die, it simply transformed, traveling through time and across continents to be reborn in new forms. The legacy of Roman garum lives on today in the fish sauces we find in kitchens around the world. From the fiery salsas of Latin America to the rich, salty flavors of Southeast Asian cooking. And while garum, as the Romans knew it, may no longer be sitting on your dining table, its essence, packed with the same umami richness, still lingers in our global food culture. The rise of fish sauce in Southeast Asia is a reminder of the deep culinary connections that run through history. Even though Rome fell, the flavors that had once made the empire's meals so unique continue to shape the world's food, bringing a tiny piece of ancient Rome with every drop of modern fish sauce. As we trace the story of garum from the fall of Rome to the modern world, we see how the ancient Romans were unknowingly laying the groundwork for the global influence of fish sauce. Fast forward to the 18th and 19th centuries, and you'll notice something interesting. As the world became more connected through trade, fish sauce, once a local, Mediterranean obsession, started to make its way back into European kitchens, albeit in new forms. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, Europe had undergone dramatic changes. The culinary world was evolving, with new discoveries, new trade routes, and new ingredients flooding the continent. While the Romans' influence on European cooking remained strong, the use of garum had mostly disappeared, replaced by fresh approaches to seasoning and preserving food. Yet, even in the 16th and 17th centuries, Mediterranean fish sauces still lingered in the background. They weren't as fashionable as the wines or exotic spices from the New World, but they were definitely present, albeit in a more humble form. Historians still debate whether fish sauces, like garum, maintained any role in European cuisine during the Renaissance, but evidence suggests they did. It was during this time that fish sauces began to pop up in the writings of chefs and food enthusiasts. Though these sauces were often seen as more of an oddity rather than a culinary treasure. What happened next was a bit of a culinary revolution. As Europeans colonized new lands and began to expand their culinary repertoire, they encountered a whole new range of fermented fish sauces in Southeast Asia. With trade routes extending into Southeast Asia, European chefs were introduced to fish sauces like nuoc mam and nam pla, which quickly became popular for their distinctive, savory flavor. It was as if the Romans' centuries-old love of garum had been reignited in distant parts of the world. And these newly discovered fish sauces carried the same rich, umami-packed punch that garum had once brought to Roman tables. In many ways, these new fish sauces took the legacy of Roman garum to new heights, both in terms of culinary use and geographic reach. The question of whether modern fish sauces from Southeast Asia were directly inspired by Roman garum remains a point of contention among historians. Some believe that the fermentation techniques and use of fish in Southeast Asian cooking were developed independently, while others argue that these sauces are an unbroken continuation of the ancient practices passed down through centuries. But what's undeniable is that the legacy of garum lived on through these new regional variations, and their influence spread globally as the world became more interconnected. Fast forward a little more, and you'll see fish sauce appearing in restaurants, home kitchens, and even mainstream supermarkets. Whether you're enjoying pho in a Vietnamese restaurant or a pad thai in Thailand, there's a good chance that the sauce adding that savory depth to your dish is made from fermented fish. Modern fish sauce, though it may be made differently than the garum of ancient Rome, still carries the essence of what the Romans developed, a way to extract and intensify umami flavors through fermentation. And even in Western cuisine, fish sauce has been gaining a foothold. Chefs in the West, especially those experimenting with Asian ingredients, have started to embrace fish sauce for its ability to elevate dishes in ways that typical seasonings just can't. It's no longer just a novelty ingredient for a few adventurous eaters. It's becoming a standard, often used in fusion dishes that combine Western and Eastern culinary traditions. The rich, savory taste that garum once provided the Romans is now an essential element in kitchens around the globe. Fish sauce's journey from the kitchens of ancient Rome to modern-day meals is a testament to how culinary traditions transcend time. It's a reminder that, while we may not always think about the ancient roots of the flavors we enjoy today, those flavors have a long, rich history that connects us to the past in unexpected ways. And who could have guessed that a humble Roman condiment made from fermented fish guts would still be shaping the way we cook thousands of years later? Historians still debate how exactly fish sauce made the leap from ancient Rome to Southeast Asia. But what's clear is that this Roman invention, in one form or another, has never really disappeared. It's been reinvented, adapted, and spread across cultures, eventually finding its way into kitchens worldwide. Today, fish sauce isn't just a relic of Roman culinary history. It's a global flavor sensation that still brings people together through food. As we continue our journey through the world of fish sauce, it's interesting to explore the unexpected connections between ancient Roman garum and modern culinary traditions. But there's more to fish sauce than just its historical roots or its cultural evolution. Fish sauce played an unexpected, though significant, role in ancient Roman medicine. Yes, you heard that right. Romans weren't just using garum as a food flavoring or a status symbol. They also believed it had medicinal properties. In ancient Rome, food and medicine weren't separated the way they are in our modern world. What was good for your body was often good for your health. And food could serve as a powerful form of medicine. In fact, the famous Roman physician Galen, who had a rather comprehensive approach to health, praised the benefits of garum, believing that it was beneficial for digestion and could even serve as a treatment for various ailments. While we wouldn't necessarily recommend treating your ailments with fermented fish guts today, It's fascinating to consider how the Romans linked their culinary practices with wellness. Garum, according to ancient texts, was thought to have many health benefits. It was believed to help with digestion, ease stomach discomfort, and promote overall health due to its high concentration of nutrients from fermented fish. The fermentation process, which breaks down proteins into amino acids, made garum a rich source of easily digestible nutrition. For a population with a more rudimentary understanding of nutrition than we have today, garum was seen as a sort of digestive aid. It was especially praised for its ability to fortify the body. In Roman medical texts, garum was prescribed as a tonic to improve digestion, and sometimes even as a remedy for fevers or to help heal wounds. Historians still argue over whether the Romans fully understood why garum might have worked as a digestive aid. But there's no question that they believed in its health benefits. The idea of food as medicine was widespread in ancient Rome, and garum fit neatly into that worldview. With its rich umami flavor, it was much more than just a seasoning. It was part of a holistic approach to well-being. In a way, Roman fish sauce was one of the first functional foods, a product that was consumed not only for its taste, but for its purported health benefits. Of course, the connection between garum and medicine wasn't unique to Rome. Ancient cultures across the world have long linked food with healing properties. For example, many traditional Asian medicines still use fermented fish as a base for health tonics. The concept of food as medicine is a common thread that runs through human history, and the Roman obsession with garum is just one of many examples of how culinary practices were intertwined with medical beliefs. But the use of garum as medicine wasn't just limited to Roman kitchens or physicians' prescriptions. It also found its way into Roman baths and other wellness practices. Roman baths, which were an integral part of daily life in the empire, often involved various health treatments. Some baths included a ritual where patrons would drink special tonics made with garum to cleanse their bodies. In addition to the therapeutic benefits of the baths themselves, it's hard to imagine today. But for the Romans, a day at the bathhouse could mean a full-body rejuvenation session, complete with a dose of fermented fish sauce. While we might chuckle at the idea of fish sauce as a medicinal cure-all, there's a deeper cultural connection at play here. The Romans didn't see a sharp divide between the food they ate and the health they hoped to maintain. In fact, many of their health practices were deeply connected to the idea of balance, which, as we've discussed before, was a central concept in Roman life. In this sense, garum wasn't just a culinary ingredient. It was a part of a larger system of Roman health and wellness. Historians still debate how effective garum really was as a medicine. While it's true that fermented fish products are rich in amino acids and might have had some real health benefits, it's equally true that much of the belief in garum's medicinal powers likely had more to do with cultural tradition than any scientific basis. Regardless, the fact that the Romans saw garum as more than just a condiment tells us a lot about how deeply ingrained food and medicine were in their culture. As modern food culture continues to evolve, we might find ourselves reconnecting with the idea that what we eat can affect our health in profound ways. In that sense, Roman fish sauce is a fascinating reminder of how we've always looked to food, not just to nourish our bodies, but to heal them as well. As we reach the twilight of our journey through the world of garum, it's interesting to reflect on how its role in Roman society eventually faded, but never truly disappeared. While fish sauce's popularity declined in the wake of Rome's collapse, its influence stretched far beyond the borders of the empire, especially in the Mediterranean. But as history often does, it turned the page to a new chapter. and garum's decline was part of that natural ebb and flow of time. In the centuries following the fall of Rome, Europe entered the medieval period, a time that saw the shift away from the Roman ideals of luxury and grandeur toward more localized, practical approaches to food and flavor. With the fall of major cities and the breakdown of vast trade networks, it became more difficult to procure some of the ingredients that were once staples of Roman kitchens, including garum. The grandiosity of Roman feasts, with their lavish banquets drenched in fish sauce, began to give way to simpler meals that didn't rely on the fermented luxury of garum. Instead, medieval Europeans turned to more basic and accessible methods of seasoning their food. Yet, despite the shift away from garum in the daily diets of Europe, its legacy didn't just fade away. It persisted in smaller, regional culinary practices. In areas like the Iberian Peninsula and parts of North Africa, where Roman influence lingered, garum's traditions were preserved, albeit in more modest forms. One of the most fascinating continuations of this Roman tradition can be found in Spain, where a similar fish sauce, garum de Hispania, was produced. While the high-end, luxurious garum had all but disappeared, local versions of fermented fish sauces continued to be used, though they were less refined and less pervasive than in the Roman Empire. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire, which was essentially the eastern continuation of the Roman Empire, continued to use fish sauces in its cooking, especially in coastal regions. In the Mediterranean, despite the political upheavals, the taste for fermented fish was still strong, and it became embedded in various regional cuisines, keeping alive the Roman tradition of garum in a more localized way. Historians still argue whether these post-Roman versions of fish sauce were direct continuations of the ancient Roman garum, or entirely new products inspired by the same principles. However, there is no doubt that the Mediterranean world, even after the fall of the empire, continued to hold on to the legacy of garum in one form or another. The familiar, savory flavor of fermented fish became a hallmark of Mediterranean cooking, echoing the long history of the Romans' culinary ingenuity. This transition from the Roman Empire to the medieval period also marks an interesting shift in the global influence of fish sauces, as Europe receded into more localized culinary practices. The world's focus shifted eastward. In Southeast Asia, the tradition of using fermented fish sauce continued to grow and evolve. While garum had all but faded from European kitchens, its counterpart in the form of nuoc mae in Vietnam, nam pla in Thailand, and other regional variations became central to the cuisines of Southeast Asia. This regional adaptation of garum is perhaps one of the most striking examples of how a Roman invention traveled across the world, adapting and thriving in new cultural contexts. By the time we reach the modern era, fish sauce's influence had fully crossed over into these new regions, where it became an essential part of daily cooking. The Romans may have seen garum as a luxury, but the evolution of fish sauce around the world shows how adaptable and enduring its basic principles were. From the Roman tables to Southeast Asia and even the West, fish sauce spread its roots, becoming a universal seasoning used in various forms across continents. Historians still debate how the knowledge of fermentation and the specific techniques for creating garum traveled. Was it simply passed down through trade routes? Or did cultures independently arrive at similar methods of fermentation? Some suggest that ancient trade and cultural exchanges between Rome and the East played a significant role, while others believe that the process of fermenting fish might have been discovered independently by multiple cultures. In the modern age, we've come full circle. The fish sauce that the Romans once cherished is now a global ingredient, bringing flavor to dishes all over the world. And while we don't see it being served in ornate amphorae or used as a status symbol in banquets, the essence of garum lives on in the flavors we add to our meals. Whether it's in the nuoc mam of Vietnam or the nam pla in Thai cuisine, the flavors that once graced the tables of emperors now serve as the foundation for some of the world's most beloved dishes. So, as you sit down for a meal tonight and perhaps reach for a dash of fish sauce, remember that what you're adding to your food has a history that stretches back thousands of years, all the way to the ancient kitchens of Rome. Garum may no longer be a luxury reserved for the elite, but it's still bringing a bit of ancient Roman flavor to the world's plates, proving that some tastes never truly go out of style. As we come closer to the end of our journey through the history of fish sauce, it's important to reflect on the enduring legacy of garum. While the Roman Empire has long since fallen, its culinary impact is still very much alive in the world today. The story of fish sauce, from the markets of ancient Rome to the kitchens of Southeast Asia, highlights how food can transcend time and geography, evolving and adapting while still carrying the traces of its origins. As fish sauce spread across the Mediterranean and eventually into Asia, it began to adapt to different culinary traditions, giving rise to new variations that reflected local tastes and available ingredients. In Southeast Asia, for example, the fish sauces we use today in Vietnamese, Thai, and Cambodian cuisines are direct descendants of Roman garum. But the recipes and production methods evolved in response to regional differences. In Vietnam, the traditional nuoc mam is made with anchovies, salt, and water, fermented for months to create that characteristic salty, umami-rich liquid. It's hard to imagine today. But this fish sauce is the result of a fermentation process that can trace its roots all the way back to the Romans' garum. The legacy of Roman fish sauce, even though centuries removed, continues to bring that same savory depth to foods all around the world. Historians still debate whether the use of fish sauce in Southeast Asia was directly influenced by Roman practices. Some argue that the two traditions are entirely independent, with Southeast Asian cultures developing their own methods of fermentation. Others suggest that the widespread trade routes between East and West during the early centuries of the Common Era may have played a role in the exchange of culinary knowledge, including fermentation techniques. Whether the Roman influence was direct or indirect, there's no denying that the basic principles of garum, a product of fermentation, traveled and evolved, finding new homes across the globe. But the impact of Roman fish sauce isn't confined to Asia. As global food cultures continue to intermingle, fish sauce has made its way into mainstream Western cooking. In recent years, Western chefs have become increasingly enamored with the rich, savory, and complex flavors that fish sauce brings to dishes. Ingredients like fish sauce, once considered exotic or niche, have found a place in kitchens around the world, from fine dining restaurants to the average home cook. While modern uses of fish sauce may differ from the lavish Roman feasts where it once starred, the essence remains the same, enhancing the natural flavors of food and bringing depth to even the simplest ingredients. The global appreciation of fish sauce is a reflection of the growing trend of cross-cultural culinary exploration, as chefs and home cooks seek to incorporate new, bold flavors into their dishes. Ingredients like fish sauce are becoming staples in kitchens around the world. It's not just used in Asian dishes anymore, either. Western-style fusion cooking often incorporates fish sauce to add an extra layer of umami. Whether in sauces, dressings, or marinades. What was once an ancient Roman luxury has become a worldwide flavor foundation. Interestingly, fish sauce's rise in Western kitchens is part of a larger trend toward rediscovering traditional, ancient methods of food preparation. Fermented foods, which have been used in cultures worldwide for millennia, are enjoying a resurgence. From fermented vegetables and kimchi to kombucha and, yes, fish sauce. People are becoming more attuned to the value of fermentation, not just for flavor, but for its health benefits as well. The ancient Romans may not have fully understood the science behind fermentation, but they certainly understood the value it added to their food. Today, modern science is catching up, proving that fermented foods are beneficial for gut health. And fish sauce, with its complex umami flavor and nutritional benefits, is part of that larger cultural shift. Historians still argue whether the Romans ever truly understood the health benefits of their fish sauce, but there's little doubt they knew it worked. Fish sauce wasn't just about the flavor. It was about a sense of balance and nourishment, whether used in food or as a medicinal remedy. Garum played a part in the Roman approach to health, reminding us how deeply food was interwoven with daily life, both for enjoyment and well-being. Today, as we rediscover the joys and benefits of fermented foods, it's fascinating to think that we're revisiting the very practices that the Romans once relied on. The flavors they cherished, rich, savory, and packed with umami, continue to live on in the fish sauces that bring so much character to our meals. The more we dig into history, the more we realize how much of our modern food culture still carries the ancient flavors that have stood the test of time. So, the next time you splash a little fish sauce into your stir-fry or drizzle it over a salad, take a moment to think about its long, winding journey from the fish markets of ancient Rome to your dinner plate. It's not just a condiment, it's a living link to the past. A reminder that flavors, just like history, can transcend the ages. As we look back at the journey of garum, from the bustling kitchens of ancient Rome to the globally beloved fish sauces we use today, it's striking how the influence of one ingredient has endured through millennia. Roman garum wasn't just a seasoning. It was an emblem of Roman culinary culture, woven into the fabric of daily life, a marker of wealth, and even an unexpected source of health. As civilizations rose and fell, and as food trends came and went, the essence of garum was carried forward, transformed, and reimagined in cultures across the globe. It's incredible how this humble Roman invention has managed to keep its place in the world's kitchens for so long. Though the Roman Empire has long since crumbled, the traditions it left behind continue to shape modern cooking. In fact, many of the culinary techniques and flavors that the Romans perfected, such as fermentation and seasoning with rich, savory umami, have influenced global cuisines for centuries. Whether it's the fish sauces of Southeast Asia, the Mediterranean's continuing love for anchovy-based condiments, or the rising popularity of fermented foods in the West, the legacy of garum is still alive today. While garum was once considered a luxury for the rich, it is now a staple in many kitchens, both at home and in restaurants. Its influence has come full circle, making its way back into Western cooking, where chefs are increasingly experimenting with the depth and complexity that fermented fish brings to dishes. In a sense, fish sauce has found its place in the culinary modern era, shedding its status as an obscure or exotic ingredient to become a celebrated essential in global cuisine. The global embrace of fish sauce highlights something fundamental about food and culture. Food doesn't just nourish the body, it connects us to history, to people, and to places. The flavors we savor today are often the result of centuries of adaptation, migration, and cultural exchange. Every time we add a bit of fish sauce to our meals, we're participating in a shared culinary heritage that spans continents and civilizations. And who could have guessed that such a strong thread of continuity would come from something as humble as fermented fish? Looking back, we can also see how the Romans' love of fish sauce reflected their broader approach to food and life. Romans were obsessed with balance, whether in their meals or their social lives. They understood the power of fermentation to transform simple, everyday ingredients into something far more complex and extraordinary. Fish sauce was a symbol of their ability to take the mundane and elevate it. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the experience. A well-seasoned meal, a moment of indulgence, was a way to show off wealth, but also a way to bring people together in a shared appreciation of life's simpler pleasures. Historians still argue whether the Romans fully grasped the nutritional value of their fish sauce. But the fact that garum endured as long as it did suggests that its cultural importance far outweighed any fleeting concerns about its health benefits. In a world without refrigeration, preservation methods like fermentation were essential to keeping food fresh. And garum became an indispensable part of the Roman pantry, both practical and symbolic. Today, we understand the benefits of fermented foods like never before. The health-conscious movements surrounding probiotics, gut health, and the benefits of naturally fermented foods are reviving interest in the methods the Romans employed with their fish sauce. And so, garum, in its many forms, continues to serve us, not just as a rich source of flavor, but also as a reminder of the ancient wisdom that shaped much of the food we consume today. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the garum story is its persistence. Despite the fall of empires, the rise of new cultures, and the changing of tastes, the essence of garum has endured. Through the long stretches of time, the way that fermented fish has traveled across continents, evolving and adapting, proves just how deeply intertwined food is with history. Every time we taste that familiar savory flavor in our meals, we are participating in a history that stretches back over 2 millennia. As we bring our journey to a close, we can look at fish sauce with a new appreciation. It's not just an ancient Roman luxury or a flavor enhancer from Southeast Asia. It's part of a global culinary heritage that connects us to the past, reminding us that the foods we enjoy today are part of an ongoing story, a story written by generations of people across the world, brought together by their shared love of good food. Now, the next time you drizzle a bit of fish sauce into your dish or taste that familiar savory kick, take a moment to think about the centuries of history that came before it. The journey from the fish markets of ancient Rome to the kitchens of today is a testament to the enduring power of flavor, tradition, and culture. As we come to the final chapter of this long journey through the ancient history of garum, it's time to reflect on how this humble fish sauce continues to shape the world we live in today. It's incredible to think that something so ancient, once born from the fermentation of fish guts and salt, would evolve into a global ingredient that now graces kitchens from New York to Bangkok. The story of garum isn't just about a single condiment. It's about the way food carries stories across time, connecting us to cultures that lived thousands of years ago. The Romans didn't just create a fish sauce, they created a legacy. And that legacy didn't die with the fall of their empire. Instead, it transformed, adapted, and traveled across the globe. from Roman soldiers to the far reaches of Southeast Asia. Garam's essence made its way through different civilizations, taking on new life with each culture that adopted it. Today, whether we call it nuoc mam, nam play, or simply fish sauce, we're still savoring the same deep, umami-rich flavors that the Romans once cherished. While the world has changed in countless ways since the days of Rome, one thing has remained constant: the joy of good food. Just as the Romans celebrated their culinary indulgence with lavish feasts, so too do we celebrate our meals today. The fish sauce of ancient Rome may have been a luxury item for the elite, but the version we use today is accessible to everyone, spreading the same flavors across cultures and communities. This is one of the most beautiful aspects of culinary history. Food, in all its forms, has a way of transcending boundaries, connecting people from different eras, backgrounds, and parts of the world. As we bring this exploration to a close, it's worth considering the simple yet profound impact of fish sauce on modern cooking. Today, it's a versatile ingredient, not just for Southeast Asian cuisines, but also for fusion dishes that blend cultures. It enhances marinades, soups, sauces, and even salad dressings. It's used to elevate flavors in ways that many of us may take for granted. Yet, it's a testament to how something so ancient can continue to shape the culinary world. But there's also something almost poetic about the way fish sauce ties the past to the present. When you add a bit of it to your dish, you're not just adding flavor. You're connecting with a tradition that's been passed down over millennia. Whether it's a little drizzle in a stir-fry or a splash in a vinaigrette, that small gesture is a reminder of the ingenuity of ancient Roman cooks and the enduring legacy of their culinary discoveries. And then, there's the comforting thought that, while empires may rise and fall, some things remain constant. The tastes and traditions of past civilization and sons are woven into the fabric of the food we eat today. Garum may have once been a rare luxury, but its essence has become universal. What was once a luxury for Roman emperors is now a pantry staple for home cooks everywhere, proving that some flavors never truly go out of style. So, as we wrap up our journey through the history of fish sauce, remember that each meal you enjoy is part of a much bigger story, one that stretches across time, connecting us to the people who lived before us and sharing a small part of their world with every bite. And who knows, maybe in another few thousand years, future generations will look back on our love for fish sauce and find a trace of our own culinary legacy. Now, as the night settles in and you drift off to sleep, remember that history has a funny way of sticking with us, especially when it's delicious. Sweet dreams. It seems we've reached the end of our journey together, and there's no more history to unfold tonight. With the last word written, we now rest in the quiet comfort of how much we've uncovered about fish sauce and its long, aromatic journey through time. I hope this journey through the fascinating flavors and stories of ancient Rome and beyond has left you with something to ponder. From the heart of the Roman Empire to the kitchens of today, history is always closer than we think. Sometimes, it's right there on our dinner plates. Now, let yourself relax and drift off with the quiet knowledge that you've just experienced the rich flavor of history. Sweet dreams. And remember, every meal is a chance to savor a little bit of the past. End of script. Sweet dreams.